A car slamming into a wall at 120 kilometers per hour feels the same as falling from just 12 stories. Now imagine 60. October 13th, 2024. 26-year-old Lewis Stevenson set out to film what he hoped would be his most viral video yet. His target was to raw climb the Castilla-La Mancha Bridge, tallest in Spain, towering nearly 630 feet above the valley below. At first, everything seemed fine. Lewis scaled the lower sections with ease, but halfway up, a sudden gust of wind rattled the structure. His grip slipped once. Just for a second, but enough to make his friend below yell out in panic. Lewis laughed it off and kept climbing. He was determined to finish, even though warning signs at the base clearly stated, "No climbing, no exceptions." Then his sneaker slid against a beam. His body swung out into open air. Lewis fell. It only takes 3 seconds to fall from Spain's tallest bridge. And Lewis Stevenson lived all of them. Blunt force trauma to the head. When police arrived, they confirmed he died on the spot. They recovered not only the body, but also the footage from his GoPro. It showed the entire fall from his own perspective. And the most haunting detail, his friend, who had begged him not to climb in the first place, had to keep filming after the fall because he knew no one would believe it otherwise. What makes this worse is that his final words to his girlfriend, Savannah Parker, was "Good night, I love you," followed by "good morning" and 3 kisses. She later said that Lewis was not reckless in his love for life, but he was drawn to challenges that pushed him further than most dared to go. And that's what we all need to remember. Pushing limits is how we grow, but forget why those limits exist is how we die. In Planalto, Bahia, Brazil, a 14-year-old boy named Davi Nunes Moreira decided to try something that sounded like it belonged in a horror story. For an internet stunt, he crushed the remains of a dead butterfly, mixed it with water, and, unbelievably, took a syringe and injected the mixture straight into his leg. But the moment that liquid entered him, his body became a ticking time bomb. Inside, the fragments of wings and insect tissue acted like microscopic shards of glass. The injection site in his leg turned red, swollen, and hot to the touch. But the real nightmare was what couldn't be seen. The stagnant water carried bacteria directly into his bloodstream. Once there, they multiplied with explosive speed, releasing toxins that caused his blood pressure to plummet and his organs to begin shutting down, a condition doctors call septic shock. For 7 days, his body became a battlefield. His blood clotted in some areas while leaking uncontrollably in others. The infection triggered fevers, vomiting, and unbearable pain. His leg grew stiff, and every step felt like fire shooting through his muscles. By the end, his heart gave out, and at just 14 years old, Davi Nunes Moreira's life ended. His death is a reminder: curiosity without caution is deadly. On a summer morning in 1920, Charles Stevens, a 58-year-old barber from Bristol, England, climbed into what he believed would be his ticket out of debt, a homemade wooden barrel. Strapped to his feet was an anvil, meant to act as ballast and keep him upright as he plunged over Niagara Falls. But what he had really done was chain himself to a coffin. As the barrel tipped over the roaring Horseshoe Falls, witnesses on shore could hear the thunder of water swallowing him whole. Seconds later, the entire barrel exploded apart on impact with the churning pool below. The anvil, over 200 pounds of iron, ripped straight through the base, dragging Stevens violently downward. His safety harness, intended to protect him, instead locked him in place as the weight pulled him under. Rescue boats searched frantically. The only thing ever recovered was his right arm, still strapped to the shattered wreckage of the barrel. His body was never seen again. Stevens had hoped for fame and fortune, imagining lecture tours and a life free from debt. Instead, he became Niagara's first fatal daredevil. If he knew, he might have done it differently. October 5th, 2003. Thousands of spectators gathered at the Royal Gorge Bridge in Colorado to watch what was billed as one of the most daring stunts ever attempted. Dwayne Weston, a 30-year-old Australian skydiver and world champion in base jumping, stood at the edge, zipped into a black wingsuit. The plan was breathtaking. Weston would glide over the bridge while his teammate, Jeb Corliss, flew safely underneath. Two men slicing opposite paths through a 1,000-foot canyon, with the world watching. But when Weston leapt, he was already in trouble. Strong winds buffeted his wingsuit, and his trajectory dipped lower than expected. From the ground, the crowd gasped as it became clear. He wasn't clearing the bridge. He was headed straight for it. Traveling at 120 miles per hour, his body slammed into the steel support beams. The impact tore off one of his legs instantly and ripped his suit apart midair. For a split second, pieces of fabric and flesh scattered like confetti against the morning sky. Then, his body tumbled into the gorge, crashing onto the rocks 300 feet below. Spectators screamed. Some fainted, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Emergency crews rushed down, but there was nothing to save. Dwayne Weston had bled out on the canyon floor in front of hundreds of horrified onlookers. He had been one of the most skilled wingsuit pilots in the world, but even for the best, a single miscalculation at that speed leaves no margin for survival. The Royal Gorge never forgot that day. Even mastery couldn't save Dwayne, because skill can reduce danger, but it will never erase it. Nature always gets the final say. August 2025, a French streamer, Jean Pormanov, real name Raphael Graven, went live on Kick. What was supposed to be a record-breaking marathon stream, close to 300 hours, would instead become one of the darkest broadcasts in internet history. For 12 days straight, Jean was subjected to humiliation and abuse. At first, it looked like a twisted game, challenges carried out in exchange for donations, but it quickly spiraled. He was dunked underwater in simulated drownings until he gasped for air or struck with random objects. His co-streamers forced him to declare, on camera, that if he died, it would be because of his own bad health, not their actions. Off camera, Jean sent a chilling message to his mother. He said he felt kidnapped, that he wasn't being allowed to leave. By the final day, his body was failing. Viewers could see him struggling to breathe, slumped in his chair, barely conscious. When he collapsed, instead of helping him, one of his co-streamers hurled a bottle at his body and slapped him across the face, trying to force him awake. Moments later, the broadcast cut. Jean never got back up. At just 32 years old. His story, and those before him, is a brutal reminder that when cruelty becomes entertainment, we all lose. If you forget there's a human being on the other side of the screen, you've crossed the line. 300 grand can get you a Lamborghini Urus, or the hospital bill from driving it. The choice is in your zaddy. A 17-year-old son of a multi-millionaire businessman pulls up in a black Lamborghini Urus, which was gifted by his dad on his 16th birthday. On one peaceful afternoon, he took the car out for a ride. He hits the gas. The Lamborghini jumps forward with 600 horsepower, tearing through the street like the lane and traffic don't exist. At that same time, a woman in a silver Lexus was crossing at the next light, driving home after work. Her name is Monique Munoz. At the intersection, far away, a Lambo was coming at over 100 miles per hour, slammed hard into the crossing car. Inside, the boy spins like a washing machine and skids another 200 feet before stopping. The Lexus was torn open, then crashed to a tree nearby. The front half of the Lamborghini was unrecognizable. Same with the woman inside the Lexus. Luckily, the boy managed to stumble out of the wreck, slightly injured, but he was dazed and couldn't process what was going on until the paramedics arrived. But unlucky for Monique, her top half was locked on the steering wheel. The car is crushed around her. She passed away at the scene. Before this incident, he already had 2 traffic citations, one for speeding and one for unsafe start. The Lamborghini was impounded for the second citation, but his father retrieved and returned it to Brendan within 48 hours. After the death of Monique, he was charged with vehicular manslaughter, and again his family settled it with around $18 million. However, the boy went through a deep guilt and wished he was in her place instead. That's where I'd want to end this case. But soon later, he allegedly showed up with a Mario Kart t-shirt and smirked at the camera. On the afternoon of July 4th, 1928, Alfred Lowenstein, one of the richest men in Europe, worth more than $100 million at the time, over $1.7 billion today, was on his way from London to Brussels. Back then, commercial flights didn't exist for most people in the 1920s. Lowenstein's journey involved chauffeurs, rail transfers, and a private aircraft waiting on standby. a Fokker F-7A/3M Trimeter, one of the most expensive private planes of its era. It cost the modern equivalent of over $1.2 million US, fitted with a personal lavatory, crew of 6, and interiors better suited for a boardroom than a cockpit. By early evening, the plane cruised smoothly over the English Channel, about 4,000 feet up. The cabin was loud. The air smelled faintly of oil and sea salt. Lowenstein sat back, reviewing papers from his briefcase. He'd been up since dawn, juggling meetings and telegrams, and now fatigue was catching up. He rose from his seat, steadying himself against the vibration of the fuselage. "I'll be back in a moment," he said, and made his way toward the bathroom. Funnily, the designer of that plane decided to put 2 doors face-to-face at the back. One to the left was the bathroom, and one to the right was the exit of the plane. The two looked nearly identical, especially when you're tired and right-handed. In a short moment, the cabin was filled with a violent rush of wind. The crew in the cockpit felt a jolt, but by the time they looked back, Alfred Lowenstein was gone. The lavatory was empty. Below them was open sky and the English Channel. His body was found days later off the French coast. The autopsy revealed that he was alive when he struck, but after about 2 weeks in salt water, the body was severely decomposed, making this one of the most expensive deaths that will not happen again. But it's nothing compared to the next one. A wife is expensive, but it's worthwhile if with the right person. People. 6. In 2012, a wealthy businessman from Benue State, Nigeria, tried to max out his stat by marrying not 1, but 6 women. Locals said he took pride in it, and often seen as proof that he could handle more than most men could, or so he hoped. One night, after a lively dinner time, he wanted to spend time with his newest wife, in the home they shared with 5 others. While doing so, they heard noises outside of his bedroom door, mixed with metal clanking. Moments later, the door bursted open. The other wives allegedly surrounded him, angry that he was showing favoritism toward the youngest, and demanded equal time. Realizing the situation, he tried to calm them down, but the group reportedly became even more aggressive, insisting he must prove his loyalty immediately. That's an odd request to a person who has more than one spouse. However, no one knows exactly how long it took, but when neighbors arrived after hearing ongoing shouting, it was already over. Not done. Apparently, when the 5th wife was taking her turn to the bed, his body started tweaking and gasping uncontrollably. Before they realized what was going on, he has already stopped breathing. Later, the youngest wife claimed the older wives allegedly fled into the forest. He was declared dead at the scene. Unsurprisingly, this isn't the only case where a boy died from an intense season or similar lifestyle. After all, it goes against what our body meant to take. Remember? Avoid fornication. Let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. One of the biggest status symbols is to lock oneself into a tight metal chunk to go sightseeing. In this case, is to the sky. October 31st, 2014, Mojave Desert, California. Virgin Galactic's Spaceship Two program was funded by billionaire Richard Branson, who promised a new era of space tourism. Each civilian would pay $250,000 per seat to experience a few minutes of weightlessness at the edge of space. That morning, the prototype spacecraft was ready for a powered test flight. On board were pilot Peter Siebold and co-pilot Michael Alsbury. So for those of you who aren't familiar, there is a system inside which rotates the tail of the spacecraft, which is meant to slow them down and land safely. But there's a specific speed you do that at, Mach 1.4. The manual clearly says it, and everyone got it in their head. But Michael, one of the test pilots, unlocks it at Mach 0.8. The entire spacecraft rips apart mid-air. Quick quiz, horizontally or vertically. 2 seconds is exactly how long it took. Michael didn't have time to eject. His body burnt up inside the rocket and exploded. His co-pilot Peter is luckier, if you call it that. The breakup throws him outside, and his parachute deploys normally. The National Transportation Safety Board later concluded that the cause was human error combined with design flaws. And 11 years later, the same idea brought Katy Perry to space.
The Piano, a famous nightclub in San Francisco, known for its exotic dancing and the birth of the first public topless dancer in the U.S. Her performance featured a white grand piano, not for playing, but to dance on it. However, this story isn't about her, but the caretaker of that piano, Jimmy Perazzo, bouncer of the club, who loves his work and his employee. That morning, some point between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. in 1983, 40-year-old Jimmy and his employee/girlfriend, Teresa Hill, one of the dancers, who was 17 years younger than him at the time, slipped inside after everyone else left the club. You know what happened next. But unlike those affairs you see in Hollywood movies where everything happened backstage, here they decided to do it on stage. After a bit of commotion, they mid to the top of the piano. The doing was so good that both felt like they were reaching the above. Or, as a matter of fact, they were, quite literally, reaching the ceiling above. Like said earlier, the piano was for performance. Under it was a mechanism that would pull the entire thing up by a press of a button. But before the couple realized, it was already far away from the ground. Jimmy took the full weight. The ceiling kept pressing. The pressure crushed his ribs inward, snapping bone, suffocating him before he could even scream. Teresa was pinned beside him, paralyzed in shock, flabbergasted with what was going on. It wasn't until about an hour later that the janitor arrived. He looked up and froze. There, 15 feet above the ground, were body parts sticking out, lying motionless on the grand piano, pressed into the ceiling. By the time they finally freed them at around 10 a.m., Jimmy Ferrozzo was already gone. Teresa Hill was barely conscious, but thanks to her thinner physique, she survived, leaving this with a new way of saying, died from height. A rainy night of June 20th, 2007. Inside Wild Wings located in South Carolina. 21 years old Brent Tyler and Chelsea Tumbleston were heading out for a date after their tiring night shift. Already past midnight with not much to do, the young couple decided to hang out in a parking lot. Nothing wrong with a low-budget date, but for some reason, they decided to start fooling around. The two of them kept towering up each other until both ended up on the rooftop.
What's that over there?
Nothing. Let's keep going.
The act kept going on until around 5 a.m. when a cab drove by the area. From afar, he couldn't recognize what it was, but after taking a closer look, he couldn't believe his eyes. Two people were absolutely naked, lying on the ground of the parking lot. Later, police found that the couple was doing the act on top of the building, but they picked a bad roof, which proved to be fatal. It was pyramid-shaped and slippery from rain, causing the couple to slip and plummet 50 feet to the ground below. To make it worse, they were still conscious when being taken to the hospital, which means they knew what they had done, just couldn't say anything about it. It's the only case I could find where a parachute would have been better protection than a condom, said someone. Calling out the wrong name is one of the biggest fears while doing it for many men and women. In a somewhat acclaimed book, there was a discussion on how no one has ever or will ever call out the wrong name like they do in the movies. Apparently, it happened here. 53-year-old Colin Scully and his 39-year-old wife, Tracy, had been married for years. They shared most of their time hanging out in the scooter club together. One night, while they were having sex, she shouted, "Paul." Colin immediately suspected she was banging a guy named Paul, who they knew from scooter club. This would be a good time to mention their British, which is why they do things like scooter clubs. Anyways, out of jealousy, he ended up s***ing her, and she died. He's now in prison for murder. We don't know if Paul still rides his scooter or really did it, but we'd recommend him to deal with his libido with something healthier and picking on someone else's wife, like meditation, movies, or the magazine. You've probably seen those videos of extreme hoarders. People who can't throw anything away. This story sounds like one of those. Tokyo, 2017. A middle-aged man named Joji has collected magazines for over 2 decades. They filled every inch of his apartment, which blocked his way to go out and talk to anyone. The neighbors, especially male neighbors, hated his place for its distinctive foul and fishy smell. But it didn't last long because soon after he moved. As soon as the landlord stepped inside to check the apartment, it hit them with a strong, horrible smell like dead fish, coming with a sticky feeling covering everything they touched, the door handle, the floor, and possibly the ceiling too. But what's crazier is that inside are piles of magazine. That later weighted more than 6 tons, stacked all the way to the ceiling. All of them were magazines. They were absolutely horrified and disgusted with what they saw, yet this nightmare would soon go away, or so they thought, because the more they tried to clean, the more disgusting things they found. Most of the magazines were allegedly solid like rock, stuffed together and couldn't be separated. Some were incredibly sticky. Cleaning process was rough like hell, but nothing beat the smell when they were trying to clean the pile in the middle of the house. There was something different about it. After struggling to get them separated, what they found there was none other than a body. Joji's body. Police were called. Apparently Joji had been doing it when he suffered a small stroke, an accident caused by autoerotic asphyxiation, near choking or suffocation to enhance the finish. You might not know it, but it's a more common cause of death than most believe. Victims are often people who perform the act multiple times a day over long periods. Anyways, as he was gasping for air, his legs or arms must have flailed and hit the nearby stacks of magazines, causing them to collapse upon him, leading to his death. A small horrifying detail is that his part below was allegedly smashed when the magazines fell, making it snapped in two. But that is still way better than the next case. One night, during a night shift, David, a police officer, received a phone call reporting a car accident. The area he received the report from was well known for speeders and daredevils, driving at ridiculous speeds late at night. But this time, the call was a bit gruesome. Upon arriving at the scene, he found a vehicle crashed into a tree. There were only slight skid marks, indicating there was no swerving, just an abrupt application of the brakes near the tree. But the car was mangled so bad that they needed the jaws of life to extract the two people inside. The driver was male, the passenger female. She was found with her head in his lap, making it look as if she fell over after the impact. This was quickly proven wrong. They extracted the male first. When they pulled him out, they noticed his pants were unzipped and open, and a part of his body, the main part of the gender identification, was missing. Odd. They got her out of the vehicle, apparently dead, but laid her flat anyways. They soon found the missing part. It was still in her mouth, and apparently had been bitten off by the jolt of the impact. The two of them reportedly passed away at the scene, but you can imagine how hard this was to pass the story on to the victim's family members. Yet, these are just a few of many cases. So go on and share stories you know about how people's lives ended because of lust. You might save someone's life who has those ideas. Well then, stay safe and see you soon.
Caffeine keeps you up, but sometimes it also puts you to sleep. In May of 2014, an 18-year-old high school senior named Logan Steiner from LaGrange, Ohio, was a few days away from his graduation. He was tall, with shaggy brown hair, loved wrestling, and the gym. Stereotypical high school heartbreaker to say the least. And behind every handsome and muscular man is his protein powder. Few hours earlier, his friend had ordered something online, a bag of bulk caffeine powder, perfectly legal, cheap, and sold by a third party through Amazon's marketplace. The friend scooped some into a plastic baggie and shared it to Logan. It looked... That morning, Logan wanted a kick before the day started, like stronger coffee. He scooped out some with an ordinary kitchen spoon, but this powder was later found out that just a single teaspoon of it is equal to nearly 30 cups of coffee. The difference between awake and dead is barely a pinch. Minutes later, he felt something was wrong. His heart felt like jumping out of his chest, and his muscles shook uncontrollably. He rushed back to the kitchen to look at the ingredients. But well, as his breathing grew shallow and vision went blur, he collapsed to the ground, foam bubbling at his lips. When his younger brother found him on the floor, his body twitched violently next to a plastic bag with white powder. Toxicology tests later revealed that Logan's blood caffeine level was more than 70 micrograms per milliliter, like chugging 50 cans of Red Bull all at once, enough to trigger and shut his heart down on the spot. Remember, don't eat anything without a label. Coffee at worst, they burn your tongue or lips, but in 2012 in India, one can possibly burn from your upper to lower lips. There was a country-made coffee machine in old-school coffee shops, or just old coffee shops. Most of them are badly maintained. Inside, water was heated under pressure to brew faster. Normally, a release valve would bleed off extra steam, but in one shop, the machine's valve was jammed and corroded. Same time, a 21-year-old man standing about 4 meters away, was struck in the head by a piece of flying metal the size of a thumb. It hit him squarely in the skull, tearing through the left side of his head and lodging deep inside his brain. He dropped to the floor immediately. 4 others nearby were thrown off their feet. Hot water and coffee splashed across the room, burning faces and necks. When emergency teams arrived, the young man was already gone. The autopsy later described a fractured skull, brain bleeding, shattered ribs, and deep burn marks across his chest. Classic signs of a blast injury. It's the kind of injury usually reserved for victims, not coffee drinkers. These machines were compared as exploding pressure cookers or autoclaves, devices that turn deadly if safety valves or seals stop working, putting hiss and whistle into one of a new modern survival signal, just like how our ancestors run away from the roar and hum of animals. A quiet evening in 2019, somewhere in East Asia. A 40-year-old woman sat in her kitchen, preparing a drink she'd made hundreds of times before, coffee. The smell of roasted beans filled the air as she poured the dark liquid through a paper filter, just the way she liked it. But this time, she didn't reach for a mug nor a sip. She simply stared at the steam. Waited. She let it cool down completely. No sugar, no milk, just half a liter of plain black coffee, left to sit until it was room temperature. That would ruin the taste for most. But for her, taste didn't matter. She believed she was making medicine. When the coffee had lost all its warmth, she took out a small plastic device, something that looked more like a plumber's squeeze bottle than anything you'd find in a kitchen, 4 of them to be exact, each filled carefully with the cooled brew. Then she lay down on her side, lifted one bottle, and began to plumb the coffee into her one bottle after another. All 4. By the time she was done, she had pumped about half a liter of liquid deep into herself, and she waited again. Unsurprisingly, as minutes passed, something felt wrong. The coffee didn't come out. The pressure from compressed gas in her grew unbearable. Her lower belly twisted like it was being wrung out from the inside. Sweat broke across her forehead. She tried to stand, but then came the stabbing pain. She started having bloody diarrhea. Her stomach spasmed non-stop with an uncontrollable urge to go to the bathroom, which she already in. Within hours, she was rushed to the hospital where doctors ordered scans and blood tests. What they found was horrifying. The entire lower part of her colon was raw, swollen, and dying. The walls of her intestine looked as if they had been scraped with sandpaper, blistered, and coated in pus. The damage stretched nearly 60 centimeters deep inside her body. On top of that, the smell of rot, flesh, and coffee that came from it made doctors have an even harder time. For days, she lay in the hospital, fighting off infection and pain while doctors tried to keep her colon from collapsing completely. And after nearly 2 weeks, she went home. It was January 5th, 2021 in Colwyn Bay, Wales. Tom was 29. A father of 2, he worked hard, stayed healthy, and pushed himself like any serious lifter. That morning, he was mixing his usual pre-workout drink at home, except this time, he was trying something stronger. He'd recently bought a 100-gram bag of pure caffeine powder online. The label recommended taking between 60 to 300 milligrams per serving, about the caffeine in 1 to 3 cups of coffee. But Tom didn't have a precision scale. He used a kitchen scale that only measured in whole grams. That was his first mistake. The smallest amount his scale could detect was 2 grams, already several times higher than the recommended dose. The coroner later said he was probably aiming for a middle-range amount, but he got his maths wrong. Instead of a normal boost, Tom had just mixed himself a dose estimated at 5 grams of caffeine powder, the same as nearly 200 cups of coffee in one drink. Moments after finishing the mix, he felt it. His chest tightened. His heart began slamming inside his ribs like it was trying to escape. He clutched his chest and gasped to his wife that something was wrong. Then foam started spilling from his mouth. He collapsed. Paramedics rushed to the scene, performing CPR for 45 minutes straight, shocking his heart over and over, but his pulse never returned. He was pronounced dead at Glenclwyd Hospital later that day. His blood caffeine level was measured at 392 milligrams per liter, nearly 100 times higher than someone who just had a coffee. His heart simply couldn't handle it. The coroner ruled it a death by misadventure, an accidental overdose. A normal day in 2015 at Northumbria University in England. A sports science practical designed to test how caffeine affects athletic performance. 2 second-year students volunteered, fit, young, and eager to take part. The plan was harmless enough. Give each participant 0.3 grams of caffeine, about the same as a strong cup of coffee, and measure how it changed their exercise results. That's what was supposed to happen. The lab had switched from using caffeine tablets to pure caffeine powder, a substance so potent that a spoonful can be lethal. The technician punched the numbers into his phone and missed a decimal point. Instead of 0.3 grams, he wrote 30 grams, a dose 100 times higher than planned, roughly the caffeine in 300 cups of coffee at once. Unaware of the error, the students mixed the powder into water and drank it down. Minutes later, their hearts began hammering violently in their chests. Their muscles trembled. One felt dizzy and started vomiting uncontrollably. The other clutched his head, gasping that his vision was blurring and his heart wouldn't slow down. Within minutes, both were shaking, drenched in sweat, and collapsed to the floor. They were rushed to the emergency department, where doctors immediately realized they were in caffeine-induced toxic shock. Their heart rates were off the charts. To save them, doctors had to start emergency dialysis, filtering their blood to flush the caffeine out before it stopped their hearts completely. Both students barely survived. They lost dramatic amounts of weight, suffered nausea and insomnia for months, and one later reported memory loss from it. Health officials said the university had completely failed to control the risks. Prosecutors told the court that people have died from smaller doses than what these students were given. The judge agreed and said the only reason they lived was because their athletic fitness had kept their hearts strong enough to survive. But don't consider yourself so lucky, because one other way to call a coffee addict is a drug addict. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next. Fountain City, Wisconsin, December 2014. At the Wingdam Saloon and Grill, a banquet was underway upstairs. Working the event was 21-year-old Brooke Bors, a waitress, talented college gymnast, and well-liked by everyone who knew her. Around 7:54 p.m. that night, she stepped into the back area to use the dumbwaiter, the food elevator designed to carry dishes between floors. For reasons no one will ever know, Brooke leaned in. Her head and shoulders slipped almost entirely inside the cab, then start dropping. Police later said her head was canted slightly to the right. When the cab passed the sill of the second-floor opening, the steel frame slammed down with unstoppable force, pinning her skull against the shaft, destroying her brainstem and cerebellum. Downstairs, a cook in the kitchen heard the dumbwaiter rattling down to its access point. He expected dirty dishes, but what landed on the first floor was a person's head. He sprinted upstairs in panic, shouting. Earlier, attendees had already heard strange noises from the shaft, but no one imagined this. Co-workers found Brooke slumped, trapped in the machine. Her death was instant. OSHA fined the restaurant about $7,000, and the dumbwaiter was ripped out for good. But for Brooke's friends, her family, it was a nightmare no one could process. Back of a takeaway kitchen, Congleton, England, on July 22, 2018. Two co-workers had been clashing all day. A younger cook had been pushing back against the older man, 57-year-old Si-Hung Huang. Other workers tried to calm them, but Huang's anger didn't die down. Later, he caught his eyes on a pan filled with liters of bubbling, smoking oil on the stove, without any second thoughts. He poured all that into the drain and made the younger man unclog it. Just kidding. What he did was way worse. Instead, when the victim was bent down in the kitchen, Huang lifted the pan and poured the boiling liquid directly over the man's head. The burning oil came down in a single sheet, covered the entire upper body. His scream pierced through the kitchen as the oil stick to his skin, cooking him alive right there. But it wasn't enough. Huang grabbed more oil, in total about 7 pints, and tipped it over the victim's chest and arm. Flesh blistered and peeled right immediately. His body collapsed to the floor as co-workers shouted and froze in horror. By the time they reached him, nearly half of his body was burned. He was rushed to the hospital and was placed into an induced coma for 4 weeks. As for Huang, after the attack, he left Congleton and disappeared. Not until September 7th, 2018, police finally caught up with him inside a betting shop in Birmingham. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. The victim survived, but with scars that would last a lifetime. It's a reminder that if you're about to argue in a kitchen, better stay taller than the other guy. Asturias, Spain, February 2013. A 5 months pregnant 36 years old woman, Begoña Muñiz Garcia, was preparing a meal at home. On the stove, a pressure cooker hissed and rattled, pretty calming sound in households across the world. However, inside that steel pot, a tiny metal part, the safety valve, failed. Instead of releasing steam, it was holding it in, far past the safety point. While she was close to it, the cooker exploded with mad force, metal shrapnel tearing through the air like bullets. In the confined space of the kitchen, there was no escape. A big metal chunk stabbed directly in her head. The impact was too violent, it killed her instantly. Her unborn child, too, was gone at the same time. The blast was so powerful, it tore apart her kitchen walls and blew debris across the flat. Neighbors recalled the shockwave rattling through the building, thinking it was a gas explosion at first. When her husband, who had been out at the time, returned home, witnessing a scene that even I wouldn't dare to wish on my worst enemy. Lawsuits would later reveal that this brand of cooker had a history of valve failures, making it more dangerous than most. Please always check if your pressure cooker is releasing a stray of thin steam above when cooking. If not, better shut the power off and go for a walk. A quiet afternoon in France, June 18, 2017. Rebecca Berger, a 33-year-old fitness model with a massive online following, was at home, making a dessert. Like a fitness model she was, instead of using whipping cream bottle, a cream dispenser lets you make fresher, cleaner whipped cream with total control over ingredients, just heavy cream and optional sweetener/flavor, so you can avoid additives and excess sugar. It whips instantly for consistent, airy texture, holds its shape longer than hand whipped, and offers easy portion control for better calorie management and prettier presentation. As Rebecca gripped the handle, the canister suddenly busted. The head blasted off, striking her chest with the force of a gunshot, cracked her ribs, and shocked her heart into a fatal rhythm. She collapsed instantly, gasping as her body went into cardiac arrest. Paramedics tried desperately to bring her back, but the trauma was too severe. By nightfall, she was gone. The dispenser that killed Rebecca came from a French brand called Ardtime. As far back as 2009, French consumers warned about its weak plastic lids and faulty valves. Dozens of incidents piled up: cracked ribs, broken teeth, even people blinded when the metal head blew off. Recalls were issued, but thousands of units stayed in circulation. By the time Rebecca picked hers up in 2017, the brand already carried a dangerous reputation. But look at those beautiful dishes they had. Wales, United Kingdom. June 2023, a bitterly cold evening in the town of Blaenavon. Inside a small flat, 57-year-old Barry Griffiths was making what should have been the simplest of meals, burgers. But unfortunately, they were stuck together, solid like bricks of ice. It would be a small annoyance for most people. But for Barry, it was a dangerous task. He had limited use of one arm after suffering a stroke years earlier. Frustrated, he reached for a kitchen knife to pry them apart. He pressed down, trying to twist the blade between the frozen discs. But suddenly, his grip slipped. The knife plunged right into his abdomen. Alone in his flat, bleeding and stunned, Barry couldn't call for help. Not until the rotten smell began to spread did worried neighbors finally contacted police. When officers forced inside at first glance, it looked like a murder scene. But considering the environment factors, the case was solved easily. Remember, if you have two hand, use both for same task. I mean, both hand on the wheels and cutting. If you have better lesson for this, comment down below while subscribing with the other hand. Birmingham, friendliest neighborhood of all England. A 49-year-old Raju Malla told his wife to make him an omelet, but for many reasons it wasn't to his liking. The argument started in the kitchen and got louder by the second. Neighbors could hear them shouting through the walls. For most, it would have ended with slamming door, but not this time. Raju grabbed the pan with hot oil and threw it straight at her face. The liquid clung to her skin, searing it instantly. Some went straight to her mouth. The scream startled the neighbors. But boy, did he stop there? Raju lifted hot metal plate racks and beat her with them. She lost several teeth in the attack. The wife was rushed to hospital. She survived, but the burns left permanent scars on her face and body. Raju Malla was arrested on the 12th of January 2025 at their home in Small Heath, Birmingham. Police described the scene as one of the worst cases of domestic violence they had ever seen, which is not true if most domestic violence cases were reported. So here's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You're able to call for help no matter where you are or who you are. Most of those stories does not happen suddenly without a hint, whether it's an exploding cooker or a bad-tempered person. Share your story where a small, overlooked clue turned into an unexpected outcome. The devil's in the details. Stay safe and see you in the next. The chance of falling out of a slide is low, but never zero. Same goes for the slide itself. 1997 in California, there was a high school named Napa. At that time, the senior students were preparing to graduate. But few days earlier, teachers came into class and announced that the school would organize a water park trip before graduation. That park was one of the largest water park at that time. Among the student was Quimby Ray Galati, an 18-year-old honor student known to everyone as the Pink Princess. On June 2nd, all the seniors gathered at school. Because that was the day of the trip. 3 buses arrived to take them there. After about a 90-minute bus ride, as the students got off, they went straight to the park and spent the whole day enjoying themselves. By late afternoon, when they were still playing, a teacher announced over a loudspeaker that all Napa High School students should prepare to leave. While students were gathering their things, one student ran up to a teacher and said that many classmates had not yet come back from the water. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the park. Teacher went over to witness a horrific scene. Many people were lying on the ground injured, twisted. Among them were students from Napa High School. Here's what had happened. A group of about 25 to 30 students had decided not to play normally, but to attempt to set a record. They chose the tallest slide in the park, called the Banjai Slide. Their goal was to set a record for the most people sliding down at the same time. Ignoring security guards' warnings, they climbed to the top, held hands, and began sliding down together. Just a short way down, the slide cracked and broke apart. They fell from a height of 10 to 20 meters, and because they were holding hands, almost everyone was pulled down together. In total, about 32 students were injured, and 1 student died. That student was Quimby. What made this worse is that Quimby was an only child. Her mother said, on that day, Quimby called home during school trips multiple times because she missed her. After that, the park underwent major safety improvements. They even changed the name to avoid public association with the disaster. Here's the new name. It was the morning of March 27th, 2018, in Bethnal Green, East London. Michaela Boer had just dropped her child at nursery and went on a walk with a friend along Burdett Road. At the same time, on a nearby Higgins Homes construction site, a tower crane was moving a pallet stacked with more than 2 tons of bricks toward a loading bay on the 5th story. You might have thought the brick was going to fall and end Michaela's life, right? Only if there wasn't any safety net there. Well, you're right. Without any sign, the load gave away, and hundreds of bricks rained down from 5 stories high. Some slammed into the site itself. Others spilled over the edge and crashed onto the pavement below. Michaela's friend felt one brick hit her hand and stumbled back in shock, but Michaela was caught directly in the path. In a blink, she was buried beneath rubble. Emergency crews fought to revive her at the scene before rushing her to hospital, but the impact from bricks falling nearly 50 feet, each one striking with the force of a car crash, was too much. By the next day, she had passed away. Cavallese, Italy, in 1998. A U.S. Navy EA-6B Prowler aircraft was conducting low-altitude training flights. Low-level flying is a difficult technique because pilots must avoid obstacles like mountains, birds, or power lines. That day, after all checks looked fine, they began the training near a mountain range in Italy. It was winter. While flying, the pilots heard a loud impact, but because they were flying so fast, they didn't know what they had hit. Since the aircraft still seemed operational, they returned to base. Once back, they saw the wing had a severe tear. They couldn't figure out what they had collided with, so the matter was dropped. Meanwhile, in Cavallese, a small town in the Dolomites, there was a cable car system used by skiers and tourists. A guard noticed something strange. Many people were going down on the cable cars, but nobody was coming back up. Alarmed, he called other staff. When rescue workers went to investigate, they discovered a horrific scene. A cable car had crashed to the ground. About 20 people were inside, and all 20 had died. Investigators found that one of the cables had been chopped. Witnesses reported seeing a military aircraft flying low in the area. It turned out that the EA-6B Prowler had flown too low and struck the cable, slicing it in 2. At that moment, a car carrying 20 passengers was ascending the mountain. With the cable cut, it plunged 80 meters to the ground, killing everyone instantly. The noise the pilots had heard earlier was the collision with the cable. Inside the plane, there should have been a recording of the flight. However, upon returning to base, one of the crew members secretly took the tape home and burned it, afraid of what it might reveal. The pilots were later tried, but acquitted on grounds that it was an accident. Still, they were dismissed from the military and banned from flying ever again. 20 years and 2,671 kilometers away from the previous incident. Winters in Moscow are long and merciless. Snow piles up on rooftops, and sheets of ice cling to buildings for months at a time. It's a familiar sight and danger. A father was walking his young son home from kindergarten. The two bundled against the cold. As they passed a 9-story apartment block, the silence was interrupted. A massive slab of ice, weighing several hundred kilograms, broke free from the roof and came crashing down. It struck straight in the sun direction. Yet in those final seconds, Dad's body shielded his son. The child survived, unharmed physically, but left standing in shock beside his father's body. Neighbors rushed to comfort him as authorities quickly sealed off the street. News of the tragedy spread fast, sparking outrage. But similar incidents had been reported across Russian cities that winter, and residents placed the blame squarely on negligent building managers who failed to clear rooftops of snow and icicles. The fury forced Moscow's mayor's office to promise stricter enforcement, but the danger never disappeared. Even today, falling ice remains a silent killer in Russian winters as well as other places. In a small village near Guwahati, Assam, a farmer worked quietly in the fields. It was a clear day. Nothing in the sky suggested what was about to come from it. Out of nowhere, an object came hurtling down. A massive blue-veined rock struck him straight in the face. People around ran to him in horror. On the ground beside him lay shattered pieces of what looked like a meteor, chunks of solid ice, weighing nearly 30 kilograms in total. A man whose life was born from a star, claimed by one itself. The scene was documented, and the story of a cosmic death began making its way through local news. People treated the object with awe. But days later, tests revealed the fragments weren't cosmic at all. In fact, they were human waste, mixed with blue chemical disinfectants, known in aviation circles as blue ice. When an airplane's sewage system leaks at high altitude, the waste can freeze instantly in sub-zero air, forming massive blocks of ice. As the plane descends into warmer air, those blocks can break off and plummet to the ground like falling boulders. That's what struck the farmer. Not a gift from the stars, but a shit block from a passing airliner's toilet. The cause of his death comforted his family at first, but later, the truth turned it into immense sorrow. Yet, even in this truth, a lesson remained. His family learned, as all grieving families do, that death often comes without reason, warning, or the chance to prepare. Not every loss carries a moral or a warning to be cautious. Those cases weren't meant to stop you from living your life, but to live your life so fully that even sudden death like this will leave a no regret. Mayonnaise. On a hot summer night, a man decided to go for a late-night burger at a drive-thru, but right after he took the first bite of his order, he noticed a streak of white liquid oozing down the side of the bun. Strange. He had specifically demanded no mayo. With a lawsuit in his head, he opened the bun and witnessed his worst nightmare. The mayo was moving. Well, that would have been better than what actually happened. It was past 10 p.m. at a Checkers. A man named Robert leaned out his car window, waving the bag back at the worker. Robert didn't order no mayo for this. He wanted extra.
One packet? That's it? I asked for extra motherfucker.
The girl at the window gave a tired shrug. Didn't help the situation any better.
Oh, you bitch! Hey, manager! Get me your manager!
The window slammed shut, then immediately flew open again. This time, the other side stood a 23-year-old boy named Elijah. He'd been on his feet for 8 hours straight, working the late shift. His life was already a storm. Out of anyone, this person is ready to snap at the smallest spark. But Robert's spark was mayonnaise. The worker climbed out of the window facing him head-on. With such close distance, Robert started spitting out more crazy insults and escalated each after each.
Are you listening, mother? Hey, are you listening? Listen, dumb. You.
Robert's body jolted. The bullet teared into his chest. The drive-thru that was full of honking turned dead silent. Literally. Dead silent. The incident took place around 10:10 p.m. on May 21st, 2025, at a Checkers drive-thru on West Earlo Bronson Memorial Highway, near Old Town Kissimmee. The suspect, Elijah Travis Mackey, fled the scene immediately, but soon later, officers found him under the stairwell at the nearby hotel. He allegedly told deputies, "I have a gun on me," then repeatedly asked, "Is the man okay?" Unfortunately, Robert died shortly after the shot. Mackey was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder, denied bond, and held without bail. The Burger Chef, November 17th, 1978, Indiana. The Burger Chef on Crawfordsville Road was closing for the evening. 4 young employees stayed behind to finish cleaning and go home, but they didn't. The next morning, when the opening crew arrived, something wasn't right. The back door was wide open, the register was empty, about $581 missing, but strangely, the employees' personal items were all there. Police assumed it was a prank. 4 kids ditching work, pocketing some cash, then run away. So they reopened the restaurant the very next morning. Little did they know. 2 days later, hikers wandered through the woods 20 miles away. That's where they found them. 4 bodies scattered in the dirt. 2 had been shot execution style, 1 had been stabbed twice in the chest, and the last beaten so savagely with a chain or a pipe that his skull fractured. He choked to death on his own blood. But further investigation never made it. The hasty reopening had scrubbed away every trace of evidence that might have been there. The incident shattered the restaurant's reputation. Even though Burger Chef was the second largest hamburger chain in America during the 70s, established the same year as Burger King in 1954, but the case left a scar too deep to erase and eventually shut down completely. In September of 2021, a man in Vancouver, Canada, decided to make a quick stop at McDonald's. Just like any routine drive-through run, you pull up, place order, grab wallet, hand over a card. In a couple of minutes, you've got breakfast in your lap. Simple. At least that's how it should have gone. The man rolled up to the payment window. He had everything ready, but as he reached out to pay, the card slipped. A little mistake, not the end of the world. He opened the door and leaned slightly out to pick the card that's lying between the car and the brick wall. But what he didn't notice was the car wasn't fully in park. With him halfway out, the car slowly moving forward, the open door slams against his chest, ramming him back into the solid steel frame. Every inch forward shoves the door harder into him, crushing skin, muscle, and bone. His head snaps forward, smacking the frame with a dull crack, while his legs kicking inside trying to reach the pedals. But the vehicle keeps moving until the full weight of the frame and wall crush him in place. By the time it finally stops, his body was bent awkwardly between the door and the frame. Inside, the employees froze, unable to process what they were seeing, and by the time paramedics arrived, he was already unresponsive. A quite similar case took place in 2018. A 20-year-old named Charles Wood Jr. pulled into a Jack in the Box drive-thru in St. Louis. When he pulled up to the pickup window, the angle was off. He was too far from the counter. So he cracked his door open, slipped his upper body reaching toward the window. But instead of moving forward slowly like the previous case, this time, the car moved backward with sudden force. The open door yanked him sideways, pulling him half out of the car before he had time to react. As the car accelerated, dragging him backward, behind him, only feet away, was a tree. The edge of the door slamming him against rough bark. His torso folded and his head whipped violently, striking the frame. The crushing force pinned him like a rag doll caught between 2 machines. Employees rushed out, but what they saw looked less like an accident and more like a scene from a wreck. His body was jammed at a sickening angle, pinned so tightly that prying him loose required first responders to force the car forward. He was rushed to the hospital, but the injuries were far too severe. May 2023, New Iberia, Louisiana. 63-year-old Nguyet Lay started off with another long shift at the Arby's she managed. She had been known as a diligent, hard-working worker, but the shift that day would last longer than she wanted it to. Inside, that restaurant had a walk-in freezer. Its door latch had been broken for almost a year. Workers begged for it to be fixed, but no action was taken. So they jammed it open with a box of fryer oil, wedged screwdrivers into the handle, anything to keep from getting trapped inside. That evening, Nguyet walked into the freezer to grab supplies. But this time, the heavy door swung shut behind her. She was locked in. For real this time. Freeze to death is described as the most brutal way nature can kill. In Antarctica, there are accounts of explorers so desperate in the cold that they chose to shoot themselves rather than let the cold get them. But Nguyet Lay didn't have that choice. Trapped in that Arby's freezer, she fought inside for hours, banging on the door, smearing blood across the metal as she struggled to escape. 3 hours in that freezer is long enough to make meat solid. She lasted nearly twice that. By the time her son, who also works at the same place, opened the door, she was curled in the fetal position on the floor, already long gone. In the weeks after, her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Over $1 million in damages demanded. The trial was said to be pushed to 2025, leaving the family, specifically the son, with a tremendous trauma. Tasty Dot Incident. Around July 2025, when McDonald had to pull out from Russia, a new chain popped up as a replacement, called Tasty Dot. Like any canon event for a fast food chain, an angry man pulled up to the drive-thru and started calling the worker
Ты тормоз ёбаный, ленивый болван.
for making the meal too long, which was a bit longer than how he can last in. The worker, Nikita, claimed the customer even threatened to exit their vehicle and strike him. He reported this to management, but no action was taken. In response, the worker gave him a few tasty dots from his mouth. He spit onto the burger patty, spread it nicely before covering it with cheese, and served it to that customer. Unfortunately, the act was caught on another customer camera. Nikita got fired afterwards, and Tasty Dot got a brand new nickname for the chain, Spitty Dot. Even though this case involved no death, it's a reminder for you that everyone is going through life in different ways. Learning to express frustration to small inconvenience with respect is setting foundation for a life without eating bullet or spits. Helmut Oven. Somewhere in the desert campaigns of World War I, a soldier woke up to another blistering day under the sun. His helmet was a shiny beacon for enemy snipers, so he decided to fix that. The trick? Hold it over an open fire until the metal blackens. It works like a charm, if you wait for it to cool. He did not.
Take me away, 'cause I can be the man. Let somebody was letting go and I can't have my way.
Helmet still piping hot when he shoved it on his head. The searing metal kissed his scalp, and instant sizzle. He tried to rip it off, but the chin strap got stuck, tight under his jaw, locking the helmet in place while the heat keeps spreading, blistered the skin until it bubbles and peels away in wet patches. By the time his mates cut it free, the top of his skull was an open, oozing wound, dotted with cooked scraps of meat. The rot killed him soon after. 1961 on a Navy ship. The ship is tied to the pier with massive steel cables, as thick as your wrist, coated in grease. Each one is holding thousands of pounds of force, keeping the ship from drifting. But if the ship moves suddenly, maybe from a strong tide, high winds, or the engines pushing too hard during departure, the load on the cable spikes. It snaps, hard, releasing all that stored energy in a split second, whipping across the ship at the speed of a bullet. That's what happened here. One sailor is walking across the deck when it happens. There's a loud crack, almost like a gunshot, and the cable whips free. It moves so fast it's just a blur of dark steel. You don't even have time to see it before it's already gone through you. The cable catches him mid-chest, slicing clean through muscle, bone, breath. For a heartbeat, his body stands. Then gravity does the rest. He collapsed in two, hitting the deck with a wet thud. Clearly, the rescuer couldn't CPR. There was no chest to press on. Lime Tomb. On the Western Front in 1916, the battlefield was a patchwork of mud, trenches, and shell craters. But some of those craters were made for graves, plural, filled with a chemical dust known as quicklime. Quicklime was meant to speed up the decomposition of corpses. But when it mixed with rainwater, sweat, or blood, it released heat strong enough to burn flesh. These pits were like boiling hot pot of disease. During night raids or confused retreats, soldiers sometimes stumbled into them. Some were mistaken as dead. Imagine plunging chest deep into warm, rancid water, your skin already tingling and burning where the liquid touched it. Now add the feeling of something soft and bloated, brushing against your arm. If you were wounded or carrying gear, climbing out wasn't always possible. The more you struggled, the deeper you sank, you would be sucked into mud made from meat. The stench was so thick it coated your tongue, and if you swallowed, you risked choking on bacteria-laced slime. Some men drowned. Others stayed alive long enough to feel their skin blister and slough off in the sludge. Rescue was just as bad. Even your own comrades sometimes hesitated to pull you free because the smell made them vomit instantly on you. And by the time they did, you might already be silent. August 1919, aboard the USS New York, apprentice seaman Paul Irwin Smith was moving through the gun turret during routine work. He steps into the hatchway, one leg through, leaning forward into the next compartment. Then someone shouts an order to seal up. The heavy steel edge comes down on his lower back with the full force. A sharp, wet crack as his spine snaps in two. The impact forces the air out of his lungs in a single, choking gasp. Top half of his body collapses forward into the compartment ahead, arms still twitching. His lower half is still hanging in the hatch, legs kicking in panic. Men throw themselves on the hatch to lock it down, grinding it tighter. His torso is crushed so flat that strips of skin and tendon are the only thing holding him together. When the metal finally seals, those last strands give way. The halves of his body fall in opposite directions, one into the compartment, one into the darkness below. In some localized trench raids, especially on quiet sectors, you'd hear a man screaming out in no man's land. An enemy patrol might capture a wounded soldier. Prisoners were sometimes tied to stakes or barbed wire, deliberately left alive but badly injured, so that his cries would carry back to his comrades. The victim would hang there exposed, in pain from untreated wounds. If his own side tried to rescue him, enemy snipers would open fire, forcing them to choose between risking more lives or leaving him to die. The men in the trench had to listen for hours, sometimes more than a day, as their friend's voice turned to a hoarse rasp, then delirious muttering and silence. It was a kind of cruelty that only worked here, in the open visibility of no man's land, where both sides could see and hear everything. In wars with faster-moving fronts, such display torture was far less common. World War II brought aircraft carriers into the center of naval warfare, and with them came a new way to die. Flight decks were busy, chaotic places, crews sprinting to get aircraft launched as fast as possible. The spinning propellers weren't just dangerous if you walked into them. At high RPM, they could pull you in from several feet away. If you were lucky, you hit the blades head-on. Death was instant, a clean red mist, nothing recognizable left. But luck wasn't the norm. Sometimes a man only caught the edge. That meant arms or legs gone in a flash, your body spun sideways into the blades, ribcage splitting open like a crate. There are reports of victims still conscious for a few impossible seconds, staring in shock at the absence where a limb had been, or gasping with a chest half gone before collapsing into the slick of blood spreading across the deck. Tethered observation balloons were used extensively for artillery spotting in World War I, far more than later wars. These hydrogen-filled balloons were prime targets for incendiary rounds from enemy aircraft. When hit, they could explode in midair at a single bright flash. And then the sky erupted, the sounds described as a whistle. From hundreds of meters up, darts with the size of pencils fell at terminal velocity and could pierce helmets, skulls, and even horses all the way through. Victims might be impaled through the spine, head, or torso by dozens at once. One moment you were looking up at the explosion, the next you were looking down at your own blood pumping onto the dirt through a hole the size of your thumb. It only lasted a few seconds, but for those caught underneath, it was like standing in the middle of a collapsing skyscraper made entirely of knives. By World War II, flechettes were largely replaced by different things, making mass dart impalement a distinctly World War I horror. Those were not happy days for people in those stories. but I hope you do today. See you in the next.